We're here. Joe Evans, Steve Graham. The commotion in the background is the Firm Foundation Expo. A number of booths and speakers, booksellers, a number of great things going on.
Yeah, listen, I want to say that it's really fun to be here with all of these people at the Firm Foundation Expo, and I'd like to say a big thanks to Chris for setting up all the equipment that makes us go on the air today. I mean, he came in with just a few minutes before we were supposed to go on the air and made it all happen. And to me, it's magic or sorcery or something. But thank you, Chris, for that.
Yeah, we've got a guest here. His name's Dean Sessions, and he's with Universal Model.
Yeah, I met Dean a few months ago when he made a presentation at the Boy Scout office down in Orem. And it's called, as we said, it's the Universal Model, which is also known as, or he describes it as a new millennial science. So, Dean, welcome.
Thanks, Joe. It's great to be here, Steve.
So, explain to us briefly what Universal Model is.
Universal Model is a new millennial science, meaning that it's a science that we're all going to be learning for the next 1,000 years. It's a new science which is something that we've never heard of before. It means it's a revolution in science. It's a 27-year project that we just released to the public through the internet a couple months ago. And today is the first day ever that we are presenting our first volume. There's 3 volumes in total of 2,000 pages. The first volume has 832 pages, and you can buy it here at the Expo. We also have a summary book that's just under 100 pages that my daughter wrote. Her name is Brooke McKay, and she just spoke to a really lively crowd and did a great presentation. And the Universal Model basically is taking a lot of theories that are taught today by modern science and showing how they can't be correct, and then showing how new discoveries change those theories into natural laws. It's been over 100 years since we've had a new natural law discovered, and the Universal Model has a large number of them.
Dean, give me an example of a natural law that was discovered 100 years ago. Or more.
Yeah, several hundred years actually. Most people know Newton and his gravitational laws. Kepler was an important scientist to discover the laws of the motion of the planets. He has 3 laws that helps us understand those. With these
Boyle's law about gases, is that one of them?
Yeah, exactly. But these are all hundreds of years ago that these things are discovered. In the last 100 years, modern science now thinks the endpoints of science are theories, and that's the problem.
How did that happen? Why did people think that there were no more laws to be? Do they think there are no more laws, natural laws, to be discovered?
Well, that is a very good question. Some people might think that, but a lot of scientists have talked about it and said, no, there's a lot of new things that need to be discovered. It's just really not on their radar at all that a new natural law could be discovered. One of the reasons is that because a natural law is actually a statement of truth, meaning when I throw a rock up in the air, it drops at 9.2 meters per second squared. It does that every time. Okay, it does it yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And that's actually how we describe truth. It's knowledge of things as they are and as they were and as they are to come. So this understanding of truth actually is the first time the Universal Model defines what scientific truth is. In science, we don't know tomorrow. The future hasn't happened yet. So we have to say, so far as known, then the sun will come up tomorrow, for example. And that helps us understand truth is something that is difficult for scientists to grasp because natural laws are a statement of truth, and they don't want to really go there in many instances.
Now, if the sun doesn't come up tomorrow, we have a number of booths here that will help you solve that problem.
Yes, there are.
Right. You're going to be, for sure, off the grid if it doesn't come up permanently off the grid.
Yeah.
So, Dean, give me an example of what one of the laws that the Universal Model proposes, because you, in your Universal Model, propose a number of new laws, right?
Yeah, there are several dozen. We actually have this first book has 13 in it. It's called The Earth System, and that's the volume 1 of the Universal Model. In the Earth System, we go over basically all of geology is rewritten. And then another important aspect of geology, which is normally not taught, and that is the weather. Without understanding the true origin of rocks and our Earth's energy field, you can't understand weather. And so we actually have the origin of weather in this first volume for the first time explained, meaning where the high-pressure systems come from that actually govern the weather. So one of the natural laws you asked about, for example, in this first one, we have a law that deals with the gravitational friction action of, most people aren't aware of this, but right now the Earth has something called earth tide. Where we're at here in Utah, the ground goes up and down about 12 inches every day, and that causes everything around you to go up and down, and so we can't observe it with our eyes, but satellites and GPS have now known about this for almost 2 decades.
So, Dean, if I understand correctly, you're saying there's something that's pulling the surface of the Earth up and down.
Correct. And that's called earth tide.
And what causes the tide?
Well, the moon and the sun. About 2/3 of the force comes from the moon, and that is, we see this with waves, obviously in the ocean and out in Salt Lake, for example. You'll see waves come in and go out. But does gravity only pull on water? No, it also pulls on the crust. So the Earth's crust actually gets pulled up and down about a foot every day.
And so that's what causes tides, right?
That's correct.
We always thought it was the moon. They would show that diagram of the Earth, and they'd show the moon going around, and they'd show the water being pulled up toward the,
Yeah, that part's correct, yes. And the universal model doesn't address all the things that have science found that is correct. There's many things that are good and correct. We address what we call the pseudo theories, the false theories that are taught as fact. And so right now we're taught that the lava that we see coming out of a volcano comes from magma down deep inside the Earth, and it turns out there is no magma. This completely changes all the scientific fields. And so one of the natural laws that we found is that where lava comes from is this gravitational friction law. By the crust moving up and down, when you take your hands, put them together, and start rubbing really hard, they get hot. This causes friction and heat.
Yeah.
This is where we have the scientific evidence that in the book. This first volume has over 2,000 quotes from every major journal article on the subjects, and so they're off their web page and science books. This is all science. This is from peer-reviewed articles and journals, but we show it in a model that nobody's ever seen before.
We're talking with Dean Sessions of the Universal Model, and this is a new millennial science. You're talking about how we've always been taught that the center of the Earth is molten magma.
Correct.
And that's where, when there's a volcano, it's the magma making it to the surface. And why do we think that the center of the Earth is molten magma?
Well, that's a good question. Let me finish the natural law.
Okay.
So the natural law is that when this friction takes place, in the crust, it causes the melt, which it expands. It has to go somewhere. It comes up through the cracks. Under every single volcano, you're going to find an earthquake. And we document this in the Universal Model, that the earthquakes before the eruptions of a volcano cause the lava. So why do they think there's heat and there's magma inside the Earth? Well, what scientists do know is that we have seismic waves from earthquakes that travel through the whole Earth. That's sound waves.
From one side to the other.
Yes, from one side to the other, exactly. And those waves are the center of the Earth has large liquid area, and it blocks these waves. It causes, they're called S waves, shear waves, and it blocks and makes a shadow zone on the other side of the Earth. So that we know there's liquid all over inside the Earth. The problem is they just don't know what kind of liquid. The Universal Model just demonstrates this with new discoveries demonstrating the liquid is not melted rock, it's water. So we'll come back to that in a second because we actually live in a hydroplanet Earth. That means a water Earth. But back to why they think it's hot. They think the magma's hot because it's radioactive. So let me ask you a question. Have you seen people going to Hawaii or ever gone yourself? When I went to Hawaii, I've been a number of times. My wife and I actually met in Hawaii. And
I just was there in December.
Okay. Did you wear your radioactive suit, Joe?
No.
No radioactive suit. Well, think about it.
I had my swimsuit on.
If magma is radioactive, it doesn't go away, radioactivity. And the lava coming out right now on the main island would be radioactive. Especially to melt rock, you'd have to have a tremendous amount of radioactivity. And yet all the islands are lava, They're not radioactive at all. They're no more radioactive anywhere else. So this is a theory that's never been proven as fact. Matter of fact, there's a number of reasons that magma is not real. Another one is that the rock that would be coming out that comes from actual lava flows, it's glass. When you take quartz-based rock, which is what most of the continent is made of, and you melt it, it turns into glass. We all, we're going glasses. We have windows in our house. We know what glass is.
Silica.
Silica dioxide, exactly. Quartz is silica dioxide, SiO2, but when you melt it, it's in a completely different form. It's what they call it amorphous. There's not a crystalline structure to it. Quartz grows from water, and only from water. And because the rocks of the earth are quartz-based on the continents, the majority of them, that means they grew out of water. And this is demonstrated for the very first time in the hydroplanet model of the universal model.
So it's not just water, it's water with microorganisms.
Microorganisms are also in the water, and they play a very important part. This is where all the ores came from, are from the microorganisms.
And other minerals or elements or whatever.
Dean, with what you're saying, what's the net effect of your philosophy? What does that mean now to us as opposed to the old models? That means that what?
Well, first off, science is not philosophy, okay? When someone has a PhD, that's a doctor of PH, which is philosophy. And unfortunately, it's not a doctor of science. It should be an SCD, not a PhD. And that's one thing we're actually creating is SCDs. PhD, philosophy is something, it's just an idea, okay? So real science is not about opinion. It's about observational evidence and real experiments that we can all reproduce to demonstrate a new scientific phenomenon that we observe.
Okay, so how does this change our environment now? So with what you're saying, that being said, how does it affect us?
Well, there's a lot of ways that affect us, okay? First off, all of modern science is going to change. I'm an omnologist. That's a new term that we had to create from omni and ologist, the study of all science. So when you're studying all the natural fields, you're an omnologist. And we'll get back to this after the break, why it's important to each and every one of us.
Okay, great. Okay. We're here with Dean Sessions, right?
Yes, and we've been talking with Dean Sessions of the Universal Model. Dean, you were saying that you and others are going to be speaking about the Universal Model.
Correct. There's about 13 speakers that will be talking about the UM or bringing up in their discussion today, over 20 discussions over the next 3 days.
So we were talking about, Joe, what is it? Your question was?
My question was, so how does this change our lives going forward? What light does this bring to us? And Dean, we were talking off the air. Why don't you go ahead and tell us?
Yeah, before you're through, we want you to read something that was in the newspaper too. So.
Right. Okay. So that's a really good question. The challenge I have is I could literally give you 100+ reasons why this is important to every human being. It affects all of our lives. Education happens to be the number one topic. I'm from Arizona. We spend more on education in Arizona, I'm sure Utah is the same, than any other tax that's collected. So the education is a very important part, and a large part of education is science. All the fields of science affect us every day. When we drive outside and you go down the road and you look at the mountains, if we don't understand how these were really made, it gives a whole different history of how this earth was made. Matter of fact, I'm going to read that right now since you brought that up, Steve. We've gotten a little bit of, there was an article put in BYU University yesterday, and actually the Tribune, Salt Lake Tribune yesterday also, that referred to the universal model and myself. And so I always want to mention here, there was eight professors. They made a statement, and this is what they stated. Students and the BYU community are reminded that organic evolution, anthropogenic climate change, that's human climate change, radiometric dating, and a 4.56 billion year old age of the earth are all seriously taught on campus by professors who are in good standing with the church in fields directly relating to these subjects.
So are these geology professors? Yeah,
there's 8 of them, okay? And I spoke with the head guy here years ago about this, and I brought up some of my questions about magma with him, and he was never able to answer them. And to this day, they're not going to unless they look at this new research. Unfortunately, they haven't read any of the books. So they made these comments, and they haven't analyzed anything in the book. They haven't talked to me about it or any of our other researchers. And so that's really the problem here, is that we haven't had a serious scientific discussion with the community, and we really can't until they start to look at the research and read about it.
Referring to that letter that they sent to the Daily Universe, it's interesting that their terminology is that these things are seriously taught.
Yes.
And
how many of us
we're
actually
good
believe
members of the church, and so that's their support for their and in other words, it's consensus, which is
yes,
the way they try to sell man-made global warming. But,
very good point.
But Joe's question is a good one. We're driving down the street. What is the knowledge of the universal model going to do to change our lives from before, when we didn't know something relative to the creation of the earth?
That's a real good one. Let's go. There's so many we could do, but let's talk about the one you just mentioned. Most people today, because it's a hot topic in the press, global warming, for example, okay? We have a whole chapter on the weather model and explain first time the origin of weather. And how could man, here's what we call a fundamental question, FQ. How could man understand that he is changing weather if they don't know what the origin of weather is? No meteorologist can tell you where the high-pressure systems come from. When you read the weather model, you'll find out, unless you understand correct geology, you'll never understand where the high-pressure system comes that creates all of the weather, the moisture in the air, the hurricanes, the wind. All these things come from the pressure being increased. It actually goes back to our previous discussion. In the crust of the earth, when there's earthquakes, there's water in all the aquifers. Wherever you are in the crust, if you drill down, it's just a matter of time before you're going to hit water everywhere. And when you heat water up, guess what happens? It goes from 1 gallon to 1,700 gallons.
That's the steam takes up 1,700 times the space
as 1 gallon, liquid gallon, right? Okay. So that tremendous amount of steam that comes up is what creates our high-pressure systems. This is all explained with documented scientific evidence in the universal model.
So the weather's coming out of the earth.
It's coming out of the earth. Now,
let me
go ahead.
Interrupt you just a minute, Dean. This is Dean Sessions from the universal model. So it sounds to me like you're saying if people had a better understanding of the source of the weather, they wouldn't be so tossed to and fro by every wind of doctrine from men about how we're the ones that are creating the problem, and our lives would be better because we are not told that we have to do this thing or that thing because we're so bad for the weather.
Yes, global warming is a political football. It's simply to tax people and to take their money and do whatever they want.
And they seem to hang their hat, the weather hat, on carbon dioxide.
Yeah, well, let me demonstrate really quick. There's one easy way to understand that it's a complete farce. They say that the water, our oceans, are going to rise. If you listen to Al Gore's thing, okay, he said in 20 years we're going to have so many millimeters rise in the ocean. Well, it hasn't happened, and it will never happen. And the reason that is because the continents of the earth are floating. Modern geologists know this. They're floating. They're not floating on magma, though. They're floating on water. And so what happens is, imagine you got a piece of wood in your bathtub, right, and it's floating on water. What happens when I turn on the water and I put more water in the bathtub? It's just like putting more water in the ocean from the melting glaciers. Does the water go up on the piece of wood? No, the piece of wood simply rises. This is why when they have glaciers and they melt, we don't have any rise. And for thousands of years we've been watching this, and people record it. They live right by the side of the ocean. There's never been a rise in the ocean. And so this is a simple way you can understand. We go through this in detail in the book, that global warming is a complete false.
So Dean, you would be holding with those who think that the climate changing is just a cyclical thing. It's just part and parcel of the existence of the earth, and nothing that we can do. And I agree with that. I mean, I think we're a bunch of little ants crawling around on this ball, and we have the temerity to think that we could have something make some effect that could destroy the weather system or whatever the earth the Lord put on the earth.
And another good part about that is the world's global weather systems are not understood. This is the El Nino, La Nina effect, okay? In the hydroplanet model, well, actually in the weather model, we go in and we explain in that chapter, it's chapter 9, the last chapter of the first book here, we explain very clearly that where these global weather systems come from. In a nutshell, what we have is friction taking place underneath the ocean. Okay, it's called oceanic plates. And when the friction takes place under there, the water under the ocean is heated in between the rock. That creates heated plumes. This is all documented with scientific journal evidence in the book. Those heated plumes rise. When they rise up to the surface of the Earth, 1 degree difference over miles and miles of area of the ocean surface creates all of our hurricanes, and then we even get tornadoes from this on land. And so once again, we now have the mechanism that causes the worldwide weather changes. And this is really important to understand weather both on a worldwide and also in a local environment.
Dean, as you're talking about the oceans, why don't you talk to us about one of the most fascinating things that I've learned from the presentations that I've been in with you, and that is about the flood.
Yes. Oh, man. We have the longest chapter in the book is 250 pages long, is the hydroplanet model. It explains how the Earth came out of water. And since you mentioned the flood, and it's obviously a religious topic, just read the second verse of the Bible. And it doesn't matter what religion you are. You can be Muslim, you can be Jew. It's in the Old Testament, Christian. Everybody that believes in the Bible, the second verse explains very clearly the very first thing that was created was water. And this is critical to understand, that it was not rock created. It was the first thing that was organized was water, and everything came out of water. Water is the primordial matter. So once we understand where all the water inside the Earth is, by the way, NASA right now tells us there's more water in the moons of Jupiter than we are saying that's inside the Earth. Okay, yeah. NASA has diagrams of this. They're in the book. We show these things. And then if you look at every time you look up in the sky, we haven't seen one in a while, but back in the 1990s there was a comet. Okay, when a comet comes by, you can see that big tail on it. What is that? What's that big tail?
They say it's water, ice, and rock.
It's actually water that is reflecting. It's light reflecting off the water coming out of a rock. What is that rock? That rock is a geode. It's hollow inside with water, just like the Earth. Well, it's not hot. Well, the Earth is not hollow inside. It has water. But these rocks that are comets, when it gets close to the sun, it gets heated up. What happens when you heat water? Turns to steam, okay? That steam comes out of it.
I knew the answer to that one.
You got it. The water comes out of the comet, okay? We see the tail, right? It's always pointing away from the sun. That's because there's wind, solar wind blowing away from. That's a whole other real important concept that we'll talk about later maybe. But the point is that water coming out of the tail, here's a real important point, time, geological time. They think this has been going on for millions of years. Well, over just 10,000 years, you're going to pump all the water out of Halley's Comet that comes around every 78 years or so. It wouldn't be there. Okay, so this hasn't been going on for millions of years. This is evidence that our solar system is only thousands of years old. And now we're coming back to the evidence of something that happened 4,362 years ago. We not only define the very year, but even the very month of when the universal flood took place. So this was a flood. The scriptures talk about Noah's flood, but we've come from a scientific point and demonstrate with more evidence, 235 pages, as a matter of fact, hundreds of pieces of evidence that the flood was a real event that took place just 4 millennia ago, and the evidence is all over the surface of the Earth.
So you mentioned earlier that when you go back, when we say, oh, this piece of wood or this fossil is 60 million trillion years old,
right,
that it seems like every time we talk about something, it's either a week ago or 200 billion years ago. There's no in-between, and that's what science has come to, right?
Right.
So you said that is not true. Explain that.
Okay, very good question. The universal model, for the first time, it makes rocks. Okay, we make quartz-based rocks, and we do it in just a couple days. And we've had to create a term that has not existed until the universal model. That term, we all know what hydrothermal is. That's water and heat, okay? Right. There is not a term in physics or chemistry that describes, at least that we could find, and we went everywhere, Googled it, that describes pressure, heat, and water.
I know what the term is, hypertherm.
Correct. Highest from hydro, pres from pressure, therm is thermal.
I only know that because I've attended his presentation a lot of
Steve's
times.
on top of it. Good job, Steve. So a hypertherm is a new word that we had to create, and in this environment, once you know the recipe, you can make rocks.
Wow. And that's what happened in the flood, right?
Exactly. That's what happened in the flood. In the entire surface of the Earth, the sedimentary rocks, a large percentage, 98% plus of them, are what we call hyperthermal rocks. And we demonstrate this in the book, how sand came from this, how almost all the sediment, all the ores were formed this way, also the coal and the oil. We go in and show that these things only take days to form. And some scientists have actually found this, and their research has been hidden, pushed away.
Wow.
This was in national, journal articles.
But that never happens in science, right? They never push anybody's theories away because it doesn't jive with their...
You have today. Well, this, when UM came out, when I started first doing the research back in the 1990s, there was no internet.
Right.
And so it was very difficult to go in card catalogs and call people to get information. And this is how it was kind of held back. But now with the internet, we can Google stuff, and the scientific research is much more open. And that's why it's fantastic. We have thousands of references in the book, and you go right to the page and find out where our quotes are. There's over 6,000 quotes in this whole 3 volumes.
Okay, listen, we're coming up on a break. We've got 2 minutes. So, Dean, give us your succinct summary for what you'd like people to know, and we'll thank you for being with us today.
All right. I'd just like to let everyone know that, yes, for the first time, evidence for the universal flood is now available for you can read and find out yourself. The reason this is so important is because once we know there was a flood only a couple thousand years ago, it completely changes all of our understanding of nature. Everything that's being taught in modern science is going to have to be adjusted. And that's because the time frame, there is no geological time frame. We go in and show that everything took place since the flood and the time period before the flood, that man's been on the earth for 6,000 years. This is shown through DNA. The second volume, we go into the living system. The third volume, we go into the universe system, new physics, new chemistry, and new astronomy. That won't be out until next year, but this year during the summer, Volume 2 will become available. It's an exciting new discovery. You go to universalmodel.com. That is where you're going to find the books and the answers. Come down here to our expo in Orem. But universalmodel.com is where you can go online and read 150 pages of information free right now. Matter of fact, 40 pages right out of the book are available online. Just go click on the About button and under Contents, and then look under Sample Pages.
And not only that, you can get a 95-page summary to read, or you can order it for a mere $5.
And you get one free if you come here to the expo.
So come on down to the
Buy one, get one
Firm
free.
Foundation Expo and look for the downstairs and upstairs. You've got booths both
Two
places.
booths, right, Universal Model.
For the Universal Model. It's Dean Sessions. He and 12 other people are going to be speaking about the Universal Model in 20 different sessions.
That's
over
correct,
the next
Steve.
3 days.
Thank you so much for having me on. I sure appreciate it.
Well, it's good to meet you, and appreciate you being with us.